At 4:12 in the morning, a mountain south of Isfahan stopped being a mountain. For 1 second, the ground did something impossible. Stone bulged upward, cracked along lines nobody had ever seen, and a column of fire and dust broke through the surface like a waking volcano. The blast did not come from above. It came from deep inside, from chambers Iranian engineers spent 4 decades carving out of solid rock, chambers they swore no bomb could ever reach. Somewhere in that fire sat the answer to a question that had haunted the world for years. What happens when the one weapon built to end the underground age finally gets used in anger? Hours later, the first images reached the outside world. Smoke still poured from a hillside that had looked completely ordinary the day before. Analysts who had watched this facility for years did not need to guess what had happened. They knew the mountain had been breached. They knew the strikes had finally reached the heart of Iran's nuclear program. And they knew the rules of this war had just changed in a way almost nobody predicted. Before we go any deeper into this story, do one small thing for me. Tap that like button right now. Hit subscribe if you are new here, and send this video to one person who still thinks this war is only about missiles and headlines. It genuinely helps this channel keep making breakdowns like this one. Now, let's get into what actually happened. To understand why this moment matters, you have to go back 4 decades. After the revolution in 1979, Iran's leaders watched what happened to countries that built nuclear programs out in the open. They saw Iraq lose its reactor in 1981 to a single surprise strike. They drew one simple lesson. If you want to keep something safe from the sky, you put it inside a mountain. And that is exactly what they did. For 40 years, engineers carved tunnels, storage bays, and processing rooms out of living rock. They poured steel-reinforced concrete over the entrances. They built blast doors thick enough to stop a truck. They connected chambers with networks of shafts so that no single hit could shut everything down. The mountain was not just a shelter, it was the entire strategy. The strategy rested on one quiet assumption. No bomb could reach far enough to matter. To break that assumption, you need a weapon that does not explode on the surface. You need a weapon that keeps moving after it hits the ground. You need what the military calls a penetrator. America built a whole family of them, and the middle one changed everything. Think of these weapons as a ladder. At the very top sits the GBU-57, a 30,000-pound monster so massive that only one aircraft on Earth can carry it, the B-2 stealth bomber. That weapon is kept for the deepest, most protected targets on the planet. At the bottom sit older bombs in the 2,000-pound range. They work against basic bunkers. They run out of force long before they reach anything truly important. The weapon used in this strike sits right in the middle of that ladder. It is called the GBU-72, and it weighs around 5,000 pounds. It can tear through about 100 feet of earth and more than 20 feet of solid reinforced concrete before it detonates. And unlike the giant at the top of the ladder, it does not need a rare stealth bomber to deliver it. That one detail is what makes it so dangerous to Iran. Here is how the weapon actually works. A normal bomb explodes the moment it touches something. A penetrator is built like a spear. Its outer shell is hardened steel, strong enough to slam into rock at high speed without breaking apart. Inside sits a fuse that refuses to fire immediately. The bomb keeps driving downward, and the fuse keeps counting, sensing every layer of stone and concrete it passes through. Only when the weapon reaches the depth it was built to reach does the fuse finally fire. That means the explosion happens deep inside the mountain, in the exact chambers where the work was being done, not near the entrance where it would just make a mess. For a facility built to survive surface attacks, this is the worst possible news. The rock that was supposed to be armor becomes a tomb. The guidance system shows how much real combat shaped this design. The GBU-72 can fly on GPS coordinates programmed before takeoff. It can also be guided by laser, with an aircrew steering it in real time. And if that laser gets blocked by smoke or clouds, the bomb does not panic. It quietly switches back to its last GPS position and keeps flying to the target. That backup is a gift from pilots who had been in actual wars. The aircraft that carried this weapon was an F-15E Strike Eagle. It is not the newest fighter in the American fleet, and it does not have to be. It is fast, powerful, able to carry a heavy load, and able to defend itself if things go wrong. Most importantly, it is already stationed close to the region. When intelligence confirms a high-value target, commanders do not want to wait a full day for a distant bomber to arrive. You might ask why they did not just use a cruise missile and be done with it. The answer is depth. Cruise missiles are accurate, but their warheads are small and they explode on impact. They can scratch the surface of a mountain. They cannot drive through 100 feet of rock and finish the job on the far side. To do that, you need a weapon that is itself the delivery system, and that means an aircraft. Response time is the hidden weapon in this entire campaign. A target deep inside a mountain can be struck within hours of being confirmed. The F-15E takes off, refuels in the air, crosses into contested airspace, and delivers its weapon before the ground crew in Tehran even finishes their morning coffee. Speed like that changes what is possible in war, and Iran is learning that lesson the hard way. Now zoom out and look at the whole campaign, because this strike did not happen in isolation. It came at the end of a long and careful sequence. The first phase of this war went after radar and air defense systems, blinding Iran's ability to see what was coming. The second phase went after command centers, cutting the connection between leaders and their forces. Those phases were preparation. This phase is the main event. The main event is the nuclear program itself. Strikes have now moved from the edges of the war to its absolute center. And here is a detail that should make everyone pay attention. This was not the first deep strike near Isfahan. Reports say the general area has absorbed roughly 20 separate bunker buster strikes during this conflict. 20. And yet the equipment kept going back in. Why would engineers keep moving machinery back into tunnels that had just been bombed? Because parts of the facility sit deeper than the older weapons could reliably reach. The outer chambers take damage, the inner chambers keep working, and the program limps along. That is the gap this newer weapon was built to close. That is the gap that closed on the night this mountain stopped being a mountain. Which raises an uncomfortable question for any country that builds deep. If the bombs can now reach the core, what is the point of all the digging? The answer is that digging buys time, and time is not nothing. It forces the attacker to spend intelligence, fuel, and patience on every single target. But time has a limit, and weapons like this one exist to find where that limit lives. There is another layer to this war that almost nobody talks about, and it is a war of lies. If real facilities can be destroyed, then fake ones become valuable. Decoy sites are springing up that look exactly like genuine enrichment centers from the sky. Concrete pads, generator sheds, security fences, all built to waste American weapons on empty dirt. The intelligence services now have to decide which mountain is real before any aircraft ever takes off. That makes the intelligence war just as important as the bombing war. Satellite images are compared against signals intelligence, against human sources, against patterns of traffic at dawn. A real enrichment facility has a signature that is very hard to fake. Power draws, heat signatures, water use, the comings and goings of senior scientists. Put all of it together and you get a picture. Get that picture wrong and you have just bombed a decoy. The facilities near Isfahan were designed with deception built into the ground itself. From above, the area looks like ordinary Iranian countryside. A hillside here, a dry valley there, a few roads that lead nowhere important. The entrances are hidden in buildings that look like warehouses or pumping stations. It took years of satellite coverage to map what was really underneath. And even now, analysts admit they are not sure they have found every entrance. Isfahan has always been more than a pretty city of bridges and blue tiles. For decades, it has been a center of Iranian military industry, home to missile work, weapons research, and nuclear science. The city sits in the middle of the country, far from coasts and borders, far from the easy reach of navies and neighbor states. That location was chosen on purpose. It was the safest place Iran could find to build the things it wanted no one to see. Iran learned these tricks the hard way, through other people's disasters. After Israel destroyed Iraq's Osirak reactor in 1981, every country in the region with nuclear ambitions got the same message. Build it in the open, and it can be erased in one afternoon. The solution was to spread the program out, bury the parts that mattered most, and build duplicates of everything. If one site falls, the next one keeps the program alive. The sabotage era made the lesson even stronger. In the years after Osirak, the program survived computer viruses that wrecked its machines, assassinations of its scientists, and explosions at its workshops. Every attack taught the same truth. Nothing above ground could be trusted. So the program went deeper and the mountains got thicker and the promise to the Iranian people grew louder. Nothing would ever touch this program again. That is why Iran's nuclear work is scattered across the country instead of sitting in one place. Natanz sprawls across the desert in fortified halls. Fordow sits carved inside a mountain near the holy city of Qom, built in secret, and only revealed when outside powers discovered it themselves. And the complex near Isfahan connects them in a wider web. Every site is a piece of a machine designed to survive losing other pieces. Zoom in on what actually happens inside these places, because most people have never seen the machinery that started this war. The heart of a nuclear program is the centrifuge. A centrifuge is a metal cylinder that spins at incredible speed to separate uranium into different forms. Thousands of them stand in long halls called cascades. They hum around the clock, and that hum is the sound of a nation trying to change its own future. The people who tend those machines are not soldiers. They are engineers and technicians, many of them trained at the best universities in the world. They spent careers learning how to make the cascades run faster and fail less often. Some of them believe they are building national strength. Others simply took the best job offered in a country where good jobs are hard to find. Either way, they walk into the mountain every morning. Here's the human detail that gets lost in all the talk of weapons and targets. Every morning, buses carry workers to those tunnel entrances. They pass through checkpoints, change into clean clothes, and go down into chambers that never see daylight. They do not think of themselves as part of a global crisis. They think about their shifts, their paychecks, their families waiting at home. Then the sirens start, and the mountain starts to shake. The sirens are nothing new to them by now. This war has dragged on long enough that the sound of warning has become part of the routine. What changed on that particular morning was the depth of the blast. The floor jumped, the lights flickered and died, and for the people deep inside, there was a moment of pure silence, the kind that comes right after something massive has happened before the dust arrives. Now, let's talk about the strike itself, because the timing was never an accident. Every deep strike begins with a window. A window is a stretch of hours when intelligence, weather, and military readiness all line up at the same time. The night sky had to be clear enough for the laser to find its target. The satellites had to be overhead at the right moment. And the decision had to be made before the window closed for good. Inside the mission briefing room, the pilots were shown the target on a screen. It did not look like a mountain. It looked like a low gray bump on a satellite photo, surrounded by roads and parking areas that gave it away. The briefing officers did not sugarcoat the plan. The target was defended, the airspace was contested, and the weapon they were carrying had to strike a single point on that bump with precision measured in feet. Those pilots understood something that most people never will. They were not dropping a bomb on a hill. They were dropping a message into the center of a nation's pride. Iran had spent 40 years telling its own people that no foreign power could touch this program. The F-15E crews were about to prove that statement wrong in front of the whole world. That is a heavy thing to carry in the back of a fighter jet. The mission began before sunrise, with the jets rolling out of their shelters in silence. Ground crews had already loaded the weapons and checked every system. The pilots ran through their checklists the same way they had 100 times before. Then the engines spooled up. The formation moved onto the runway, and the night swallowed them one by one. From that moment, everything depended on timing. Tankers were already waiting in the sky, fat aircraft full of fuel, orbiting far from the fighting. The fighters plugged in, took on thousands of pounds of gas, and pressed on. Crossing into the region meant crossing into range of air defenses, and every pilot in the formation knew the second that happened. In the cockpit, the warning systems went quiet, which was worse than them screaming. Quiet meant the defenses were watching but holding their fire. That silence was the most dangerous part of the night. Iranian radar could see parts of the formation, and the defenders had to decide what to do about it. But pulling the trigger on a surface-to-air missile would light up the radar and give the strike package an exact location to destroy. So the defenders waited. The attackers waited. The mountain sat in the dark, and the only clock that mattered was the one counting down inside the weapons bay. The approach used the terrain itself as cover. The jets flew low, dropping into valleys where the radar coverage was weak, using the same trick that the people who built the target had used to hide it. Hills that were supposed to protect the facility were now shielding the aircraft that carried its destruction. Irony like that is common in war. The ground you trusted becomes the ground that hides your enemy. 10 minutes before release, the formation climbed just enough to reach the right angle for the drop. The target computer locked on. The pilot's finger hovered over the release button, and for a moment, there was nothing but the sound of breathing inside the helmet. Then the command came over the radio, short and flat, the way professionals say the words that end other people's lives: weapon away. The bomb left the aircraft and began to fall. It did not glide like a cruise missile. It dropped, accelerating under gravity, and the only thing guiding it was a stream of coordinates and laser light. Below, the mountain waited in the dark, completely unaware that a 5,000-pound spear was falling toward its heart. The time from release to impact was measured in seconds. Every one of those seconds mattered. When the weapon hit the mountainside, it did not bounce. It did not tumble. The hardened shell punched into the rock the way a knife enters an apple, and the ground swallowed it whole. Dust shot up from the entry point, but the bomb itself kept moving downward, shedding speed but never stopping. Inside its skin, the fuse was awake now, counting layers, waiting for the exact depth its designers had written into its memory. Rock shattered around the weapon as it bored deeper. Steel-reinforced concrete met the nose and lost. The bomb smashed through blast doors that were built to stop trucks, through walls that were built to stop bombs, all without exploding once. That is the part people cannot believe. The most dangerous moment in the weapon's flight was not the impact. It was the seconds after, when it was still alive and still going down. Deep inside the mountain, the first sign of trouble was a sound. Workers described it later as a low rumble that grew into a roar coming from above and behind the walls, sounds that should not exist inside solid rock. Some of them started moving toward the exits. Others froze, waiting for someone to tell them what was happening. Nobody had time to reach the doors before the floor lifted under their feet. The fuse finally did its job at the depth it was designed for. The warhead detonated inside the lower chambers, in the very space where the enrichment work was being done. The explosion was not a surface blast that throws dirt around and then disappears. It was a contained hammer blow, unloading its entire force into bare rock and machinery. The tunnel that was supposed to protect the program became the vessel that held its destruction. What happened next was worse than the initial blast. A chain reaction began running through the facility. The fire reached stored materials, and the fire turned into explosions of its own. Gas lines vented into the tunnels and ignited. Secondary blasts fired off one after another for minutes, each one visible from the surface as a separate pulse of light through a different shaft. Analysts watching from space could count them. Each pulse was a room dying. From above, the mountain looked like it was breathing. Smoke poured from vents that had been hidden for decades. The hillside that had been plain and brown for 40 years was now glowing red at the edges, lit from underneath by fires no fire truck could reach. This was the moment the intelligence agencies had been waiting for since the first satellite photo confirmed what was inside. The mountain had finally admitted what it was holding. Back at the command center, the assessment screens began filling with data. The entry point was exactly where the planners had put it. The blast signature matched a deep detonation, not a surface hit. And the secondary explosions told the story that the first blast could not. Whatever had been stored in those lower chambers had been reached, and whatever it was now burning. The mission was not just successful, it was textbook. The world did not need to wait for the official reports to know something enormous had happened. Seismic sensors across the region picked up the shockwave traveling through the ground. For a moment, the event looked like a small earthquake under the plateau, until the signature was matched to the location, and the location matched to the mountain that was never supposed to open. The Earth itself had testified against the secrecy. But here is what nobody expected. The response from Tehran did not come in the shape that most military analysts predicted. There was no immediate missile barrage, no dramatic announcement of retaliation, no state funeral for the program. Instead, there was silence. Hours passed with nothing but routine statements about aggression and resistance. That silence told its own story, and it was a story about a government trying to figure out what to say. Because what do you say when the mountain fails? For 40 years, the regime had built its credibility on that mountain. The nuclear program was sold to the Iranian people as the ultimate guarantee that the nation could never be pushed around again. Every speech, every anniversary, every poster of the program's achievements rested on that promise. A strike that reaches the deepest chambers is not just a military loss. It is a broken promise made of rock. That is why this strike matters more than the damage it did with its own explosion. The blast destroyed equipment and chambers, yes, but the deeper damage is to the idea that underground means untouchable. And once that idea dies, every future decision inside Iran gets made in a different world. The question is not whether Iran can rebuild the tunnels. The question is whether the leadership will ever believe in a new mountain again. The days after the strike were full of contradictions, and contradictions are the most honest thing a government says under pressure. One official would insist the nuclear program was untouched and stronger than ever. Another would quietly admit that the damage was serious and would take time to repair. Both statements came from the same government in the same week. Observers who watch these things closely took note, because governments that agree with themselves do not usually say opposite things. There was also the question of the deal. Reports emerged that an agreement between Washington and Tehran was close to being finalized, with senior officials on both sides expected to sign off within days. Then, within hours, different voices inside the Iranian government publicly denied that any such deal existed. On the surface, that looks like confusion. Look closer, and it looks like a leadership fighting itself in public, too divided to keep one story straight. Some factions in Tehran want this war to end. They see the cost, and they understand that every additional week of bombing removes another piece of what they wanted to use as leverage. Other factions refuse to accept that reality out loud. They need the story of the untouchable program to survive, even as it crumbles underground. When the hawks and the pragmatists start leaking against each other, the cracks in the government become visible to the whole world. And then there is the water, because this war has a second front that does not get the same attention. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important shipping lanes on Earth. A huge share of the world's oil moves through it every day. Iran has declared the strait closed to shipping, warning that any vessel trying to pass will be attacked. That is a threat that, if it were real, would send shockwaves through every economy on the planet. We are more than halfway through this breakdown now, so let me pause for a moment. If this kind of explanation is helpful to you, the kind that goes past the headline and into the actual mechanics of what is happening, leave a comment below and tell me one thing you learned so far. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who are trying to understand this conflict properly. Now, back to the water, because the real story there is telling. Here is what happened when that threat got tested. Iranian forces launched attack drones toward a commercial tanker moving through the strait. American naval and air forces, waiting for exactly this move, shot both drones out of the sky before they could touch the ship. The tanker kept going, and the flow of shipping never stopped. Announcing a blockade and enforcing one are two completely different jobs, and the announcement is the easy part. The gap between what Iran claims and what is actually happening on the water is now impossible to ignore. Ships are moving through the strait every day, under military escort, on schedule. Insurance companies that price the risk of losing a cargo have watched the threats and the outcomes keep telling them the same thing. The route is dangerous, but it is still open. Fear premiums only stay high when the fear keeps coming true. That is the quiet economic war hiding inside this conflict. Every threat against shipping pushes oil prices and insurance costs higher, but only if the threat succeeds often enough to feel real. When drones keep getting shot down and tankers keep arriving safely, the market adjusts. Money has no patience for propaganda. It watches actual results. And the actual results on the water right now say the strait is dangerous, but it is not closed. Oil markets showed the same cold logic. The morning after the mountain opened, prices jumped for a few hours, the usual reflex when a major military step shakes the region. Then they settled back down, because the oil was still flowing and the tankers were still moving. Traders bet on outcomes, not announcements. The outcome said the war was getting worse, but the supply line was holding, and the prices listened to the supply line. Now look at what all of this means for the future of the war itself, because the pieces are finally starting to line up. The military campaign is methodically removing the program that Iran believed was untouchable. The diplomatic track is showing real progress and real collapse at the same time, depending on which official is talking. And the naval front has turned into a demonstration of Iran's limits in front of the entire global economy. None of this happens by chance. Put it together, and a picture emerges. This is a campaign being run by people who think in months, not days. They remove one layer of capability, wait for the reaction, then remove the next. They are not chasing headlines. They are changing the table that future negotiations will be held on. Every facility destroyed, every mountain breached, every round of denials from Tehran, all of it is making the other side weaker before the talking even starts. So let's go back inside the mountain one more time, because the full weight of what happened deserves a closer look. The complex near Isfahan was not a small site. It was one of the largest and most fortified nuclear hubs in the entire country, the result of 4 decades of steady construction. It had redundant power, redundant air, redundant entrances. It was designed by people who thought in terms of decades, and it was undone in seconds. The weapon that undid it was chosen with the same care that went into building the mountain. Commanders could have reached for the giant at the top of the ladder, the 30,000-pound penetrator that only the B-2 can carry. Using it would have sent an even louder message about American seriousness, but it also would have tied up the rarest aircraft in the fleet for a single target. The GBU-72 offers most of the effect at a fraction of the cost and effort. That choice is strategic restraint, and restraint is a message by itself. It tells Iran that the United States does not need its most extreme weapon to reach the deepest chambers. It tells Tehran that there is another heavier step waiting if the program refuses to change course. And it tells every other country watching, the ones with their own tunnels and their own secrets, that the ceiling on American reach is higher than they calculated. Inside the F-15E cockpit, the seconds after weapon release were the longest of the mission. The pilot could not see the bomb. It was already half a mile below the aircraft and falling. All he could do was wait for the time of flight timer to reach 0, listen to the radio, and watch the horizon for any sign of the mountain answering back. When the timer hit 0, the ground lit up in the distance, and nobody on the radio said a word. That silence on the radio is a detail veterans will recognize. When a strike goes well, there is no cheering, no celebration. There is just the quiet confirmation that the job is done in the immediate work of flying home. The jets turned, dropped low again, and ran for the coast with empty racks under their wings. Behind them, the mountain did what no mountain was supposed to do. It burned from the inside out. Back at the base, the debrief was brief and professional. Photos of the entry point, timestamps, radar returns, all of it went into a file that would be studied for years. The crews went to bed as the sun came up. Somewhere in that same sunrise, the first Iranian officials were being woken with the news. And in the tunnels themselves, the fires were still burning hours later, with no safe way to reach them. Let's be clear about what was lost, because the fog of war loves to hide numbers. The full damage inside the mountain may not be known for months. Intelligence analysts will look at smoke signatures, heat readings, and satellite passes to estimate how much of the enrichment capacity survived. What the secondary explosions already told the world is this: the core was reached, and whatever was stored at that depth was hit. That is the part Iran cannot spin. The counter-argument from Tehran goes like this: the program is bigger than one mountain. There are other sites, other tunnels, other facilities scattered across the country. Some equipment can be rebuilt, some can be moved, and the scientists know their work better than any bomb. All of that is true, and none of it changes the central fact. The guarantee that held the whole strategy together, the guarantee of depth, has now been proven hollow. This is why the timing of these strikes matters so much. A campaign that destroys everything at once invites a desperate response. A campaign that peels away one layer at a time gives the other side a chance to calculate, to realize the cost of continuing, and to choose a different path. The mountain near Isfahan was not the first target, and it will not be the last. It was a step in a staircase that is still being built.